Hello, I'm Odin, and today I'm going to make what is possibly one of the longest running requests I've had. It's the Omnitrix from Ben 10, as seen in Episode 1, Season 1 of Ben 10. So one of the fun things of building this particular prop was making sure that I had the right one. And having not really watched the show, I couldn't just easily pick that out. Notice that there's 5 or 6 different versions. So I found an image that is of the original first series Ben 10 watch. And then I found a really good straight-on view of the Omnitrix. This I brought into Inkscape and just drew out all the details exactly as I had seen them. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping all of the dimensions equal to themselves, so this will be as accurate as I can be to the actual art. But once I had all that drawn out, I took one of these side pipes and scaled the drawing to be 15 millimeters, because I can get a 15 millimeter HD foam dowel. So then I knew the size that I wanted to make the watch. Next I took a 6 millimeter foam ruler and then measured my arm. And then I made a pattern for the band that should fit around my arm with the taper that I need going from the thickest part of my arm down to the wrist. After doing all that, I finally have a set of paper plans that I should be able to use to make the Omnitrix. So here's my top-down view with the pipes here at 15 millimeters in diameter, and this is the band that should fit around my arm, where the innermost portion of this is equal to the panel that I see here. Now, having done all this, let's see if it translates into foam. I did rework the pattern a couple of times to make sure it would fit and line up correctly. I traced the pattern and cut the armband from some 6 millimeter foam. It may look odd because it's an arc and not just a straight piece, but it needs to be that shape so it'll fit neatly around my arm. Good. There is an inner panel that is part of the pattern. In the show, it looks like it's just a stripe of paint, but I cut mine from some 2 millimeter foam because it'll be easier to paint. There we go. So this bit goes on the outside of the band, so I've got 2 pieces to the band already. Now this guy, what I want to do is just measure the size of the bottom layer. And I'll cut mine from 2 millimeter foam. It's just about 89 millimeters square. And then cut the square in half to fit on either side of the band opening. So I got the band. I've got the bit that goes around to the back of the band you can't see in this drawing. I've got this panel here, so I can start cutting out some discs. This wants to be 27 in diameter. I checked the hole drills that I have, and they're all a little smaller, which is good because I can add material around them to make the cutouts the correct size. First, I'm going to cut the pieces for the side button. This first piece can be the base. I'm using my largest Cos Tools hole cutter right now. The second disc is the same diameter. It's thicker foam, but it needs a hole for the button. So with the middle-sized cutter, I try to line up the centers and then cut out the middle of the first piece. That's pretty good. That's a little bit off, but that's pretty good. I just didn't cut all the way through. My plan is to stack the parts, but I need to make a sloped bezel around the stack. I cut a piece of 6 millimeter foam on an angle, just some steep angle, which gives me a triangle-shaped piece. Yep, there's enough there. Okay, so that gives you my muscle. Yep. All right, there's that. I don't need those. I got these. So I've got some of the main pieces I need for the band. These are the pieces I need for the little button that goes on the side, or light, or whatever the heck it is. I use the medium-sized drill to cut 4 more discs of 6 millimeter foam. So these are all the buttons that are going to go on the side. These need more work, but these are the basic pieces. I check a still from the show before I cut any more pieces. Well, it's interesting. They're very different in size here. Between the art from the show and the art that I traced, the art in the show is different. So I'm going to change what I've got here to match what I'm seeing on screen. Animation. It's fun. It's consistent, isn't it? It's all right. It's a bigger, what am I trying to say? That one's bigger. What part about it is bigger, Odin? That one is bigger because what I'm seeing is that the display is larger, so I like that. I'm gonna go ahead and keep the outside edge. So this is what? It's about 4. Okay, so let's just do from here to there. Let's just cut it out at 60. We want a 60 millimeter or 6 centimeter diameter. I set my circle cutter to 60 millimeters. And this tool is pretty cool. It has a tiny spinning blade that cuts a circle as you turn the handle. You reset the cutter, and then I can cut another circle exactly the same size, as long as I didn't adjust the cutting arm. But as I do need a watch face type display, I am going to be adjusting the arm smaller and carefully cut out the middle of one of the pieces. That's off center, but that's not too bad. That's not easy to do. So I'm going to let that slide, much as I probably shouldn't. Cut my watch interface. I need to cut another angled piece. This is now 10, right? So I need to get myself a piece of 10 millimeter and cut that at an angle. Yeah, 10. Good, okay. I have a small piece of 10 millimeter foam, which I just cut on an angle, and I check to make sure that I have enough to wrap all the way around. Oh, good. It's a tiny bit longer than I need. All right, this should work. All right. What I need to do, I need to put the hourglass diagram, the X diagram. It's an X, Odin. It's Ben 10. It's a 10. I need to put the X into it. So I cut the center out from my paper pattern and use it as a guide for marking the foam. Now I am changing the guide as I made it. These lines are going to be smaller and closer together than we see on the pattern right now. You may have noticed that you can't see these cut lines. So I spent all this time, all this effort, making a diagram and immediately deviate from my diagram. But that's okay. That's what I get for copying whatever artwork I found that I thought looked right, and then when I actually look at stills from the show, it was wrong. So I've got some scored lines that I've put into the top of the piece here. This is going to be the main dial. I know I haven't built anything yet. That's going to happen in just a second. What do I mean by scored lines? Well, when you're cutting something, whether it's foam or cardboard or foam core or styrene, when you cut all the way through, like I did in the circle here, that's a cut, right? I've made a cut. When you score something, you cut lightly and you don't cut all the way through. So I've got these lines that are just kind of part way through. And what I'm going to do is use these as a painting guide. But when it's all glued down flat, they're going to be really hard to see. So something you can do with foam is you take a heat gun and you can actually shrink the foam a little bit, which will make all these lines open up and be very easy to see. I set a piece of scrap foam on the table to protect my cutting mat. The mat can warp from the heat of the heat gun. So can a hairdryer work? I probably should give it a try. My opinion has always been no. Hair dryers don't get hot enough. Heat guns get really hot, and it does not take long for the foam to react, and the surface shrinks just a little, opening up the score marks that I had made. So let's switch out this bit of foam for a test piece, just to see if my hair dryer gets hot enough to open up these score marks. I have everything set on the high setting, and I'll also be pressing the turbo button. And I'm really not sure if this is going to work or not, because I've seriously have never tried it. But I held the hairdryer set on high with turbo pressed for about a minute and a half and saw no change to the foam. So now I've got a heat gun set on low with the wattage at about 2/3 of the way. Also, notice how much quieter the heat gun is. And it took less than 10 seconds to work. So, does a hairdryer get hot enough? No, you pretty much have to use a heat gun to do this kind of a trick. So, finally tried it. I've always believed that was true. Now I know for sure. I have cut and prepared all the pieces that I need, so it's time to start assembly. I double check my reference photos. I'm going to use a combination of glues with this. First is some super glue to attach the bezel to the display. Now this glue sets up very quickly, which is nice. But for the bezel that wraps around the outside, I'm going to use contact cement to hold it on. Once the contact cement dries, I can stick the decorative edge to the display, trim the ends, and a drop of super glue will hold them shut. That actually cleaned up better than I thought it would. All right, I still want to go through and this is a little too wide. Yeah, I'm going to be happier if I do it. What am I talking about? I'm looking at the edge that I've got here. I'm looking at the diagonal side of the bezel, and I think it's too wide. I think I want to try and bring it in a little bit, as well as some of the edges are a little thicker, and I've got some bumps from when I was cutting it, because I would kind of start and stop and start and stop when I was cutting the diagonal. So I can see all those marks. That's being real picky, but I'm going to be picky. So I'm going to get the Dremel, and I'm going to clean up the outside a little bit. I use a grinding stone set at about half speed and smooth out the sides of the bezel. I also taper the sides of the small lights that will go around the main display. And keeping a hold of these tiny pieces is the hardest part. I'm going to use my smallest Cos Tools hole drill to score the top of each of these small pieces. And I can skewer each one on a sewing pin, and that way I can hold them easily while opening up the scored cut to the heat gun. And super glue will keep these tiny pieces in place. For the button that is on the side, I glue the base to a ring of foam, add a drop of glue, and a 2mm bit to fill in the hole just a little, and then finally glue in the dome button or light piece. And it sticks up higher, kind of like the way the artwork is in the show. And contact cement to stick the bevel around the sides. So we got this guy now, it's just drawing, and I can put the bezel around the end of it. And then I've got the two main pieces kind of done. I mean, the whole thing is just pieces, right? But yeah. All right. And when it dries, I stick the whole thing to the thing. I also hit this part with a heat gun to open up the spaces between the button and the walls. Now I feel like I can start on the armband. I trace where I want to glue the base panel for the controls. This is the 2mm square that I had cut in half a little while ago. On one side, I trace the dial and cut out that portion that'll be under the dial when it's put together. My plan is to fill this spot with a piece of Velcro, which I also cut into the same half circle shape. I stick the top half of the dial onto the armband and stick the loop side of the Velcro to the other half, which gives me a way to close the armband, and it closes just like it does in the show, so that's a plus. There is also a 2mm panel that I cut just for the detail that goes around the armband. More contact cement will hold this in place. And the side button is placed in the widest point on that band. So that's the majority of the details that I want on this thing. But what I need to do are the tubes. There's 2 pipes or tubes that go around the outside of this. And the entire scale of this thing I based off of the sizes of EVA foam dowels that I could get a hold of. And so I'm going to use 15mm full round dowels from HD Foam. I cut one end of the dowel at 45 degrees. Now just glue this end onto the band and then wrap it around to the other side. The dotted lines on the armband pattern are there as guides just to do this. I can trace that line around the band, using it as a guide for gluing the dowel in place. Super glue the ends where I want them, and start working around the band, super gluing the dowel down following the pencil mark. And I cut the other side at an angle and super glue it in place as well. And that's the basic construction. I wanted to keep this prop kind of simple, but I still have the details that I wanted to see from the show. In the show, because it's a cartoon, the sides are equal. They're not tapered like this is. I had to taper this to fit my arm because my arm doesn't have cartoon, well, it kind of does, but my arm doesn't have cartoon proportions. So that's why in the end, this one has got a little more of a tapered shape because this is what's actually going to fit me. And I was making this to fit me. I'm going to paint the Omnitrix using Plaid FX acrylic paints. The main display and all the smaller lights are going to be painted green. The band has 2 different dark gray colors, both of which needed to be custom mixed. A slightly lighter gray is on the outside of the tubes and around the display ring. That gray also fills the inside of the band. I decided to fully paint the inside as this prop will be on display more than it's going to be worn. There's a fair amount of white on the prop. The top of the bezel is white, and the inside walls of the display. And the pipes are solid white. I use masking tape to keep the white off the custom mixed gray because that's going to be hard to color match. I let all the paint dry again, and then I paint the light gray that is just inside of the display. Now this is why I wanted the panel lines on the display, because it makes painting a straight line a lot easier. Then I start painting all the black areas, like the raised inside panel. It's also easier to paint because it's raised, right? There's the panel that's behind the display, which is fun because I have to avoid the white and gray painted stuff, but I wanted to paint all that first. And the top of the bezel ring. Then there's the open X on the display. It also needs to be black. Once again, the cut panel lines are on my side for keeping straight lines while painting. One of the last details I paint is the thin black line just inside on the display. I think this prop really needed that outline. Then I did some very minor dry brushing on most of the corners, just to add a little something extra. And after all the paint was dry, I used a gloss Mod Podge to give a shine to the display and the green lights. All the materials I used in this video I already had in the shop, but I put a list in the description. I'm not really sure why I took so long to actually make this thing. This was a lot of fun to do. The Omnitrix wasn't a bad project at all. It was a really fun weekend project. I spent one day getting the bulk of the project put together, and then a whole nother day off and on casually painting it up and letting the paint dry. That was really kind of fun. I think I really enjoy making these cartoon props. Now I know there's anime props, there's animated movie props, and I've done both of those before as well, but this and like the Darkwing Duck Gas Blaster are the two that I would be more comfortable classifying as cartoon as opposed to anime or animated movie like the Matrix of Leadership or Dragon Ball Z. My Hero Academia, the list is huge. Anyway, it's fun. There's freedom with cartoon props. There's freedom with all animated props because the cell art is never really 100% consistent. Even with Ben 10, there's different points with the animation where I've seen in the clips that I've watched. I haven't watched the show. I've just seen some clips that it changes. It changes color. It changes shape. It changes the relationship of the sizes because it's however it's being drawn in order to get the impact of the scene that you need to see. Which is great because that gives you a little bit of freedom for building. So definitely, if you want to make one of these, don't be intimidated by it. Take my plans, modify them to fit you, which is easy enough to do. Change the armband in order to fit the size of your arm. If you need to scale it up and down, you can do that. I just made these to fit these 15mm dowels because it was easy. I think you can get some EVA dowels from Beauty Supply that's used for curling hair that comes in different sizes other than 10, 15, and 20mm. So new things to go and look for. But if you do decide to make a Ben 10, please send me a picture. I would love to see it. And I know that there's going to be lots of different ways that you can make the Omnitrix from Ben 10. But this is how Odin makes. I want to thank James for the Rebel Base build, Tim Watts, and all of my Patreon supporters. My Patreon support is the #1 thing that makes this show possible. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.